In the suffocating darkness of a spring dawn in 1623, a scream sliced through the marble corridors of Topkapi Palace. It wasn't the cry of a dying soldier or a prisoner's plea. It was Princess Fatma, only 15 years old, daughter of the most powerful sultan on earth, screaming with such terror that even battle-hardened guards backed away in fear. What happened behind those gilded doors that night wasn't love. It wasn't ceremony. It was a ritual so disturbing that the Ottoman Empire buried it for 6 centuries. This is the story they never wanted you to know. The hidden price every sultan's daughter paid. A tradition that shattered minds long before it ever touched bodies. What you're about to hear comes from encrypted records unearthed in Istanbul's restricted archives in 2019, verified by Ottoman historians at Boğaziçi University, and censored from every official chronicle for over 600 years, until now. For more than 6 centuries, from 1299 to 1922, the Ottoman Empire stretched like a vast shadow across 3 continents. Its armies shook the gates of Vienna and burned across Arabian deserts. When Constantinople fell in 1453, it became Istanbul, the beating heart of a power that bent kingdoms to its will. At the empire's center stood Topkapi Palace, a labyrinth of marble courtyards and secret chambers, where the fate of nations was sealed in whispers. And deep within those walls existed another world, the imperial harem, a place of silk, shadows, and silence, where more than 800 women lived in a hierarchy as fragile as it was cruel. From 1530 onward, after Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent elevated his wife Hürrem to Haseki Sultan, the harem transformed from pleasure into politics. Behind the curtains, alliances formed, rivalries burned, and the empire itself often bowed to the will of women hidden behind latticed windows. Most of these women were young, Christian slaves captured from Europe or bought in North African markets. They entered a brutal training system called the carrière, learning music, poetry, embroidery, and above all, the art of absolute obedience, dreaming that one day they might catch the Sultan's eye. Some rose astonishingly high during the era known as the Sultanate of Women, 1533 to 1656, when figures like Kösem Sultan and Turan Hatice Sultan quietly steered the empire's course from behind screens. But the Sultan's own daughters faced a far crueler fate. They were currency, human bargains used to buy loyalty, seal alliances, and keep commanders bound to the throne. From birth, their destinies were written in invisible ink, marriage to whomever best served imperial strategy. And into this world of golden captivity, Princess Fatma Sultan was born in 1606, daughter of Sultan Ahmed III and the formidable Kösem Sultan, the woman who would later rule the empire from the shadows. Even by palace standards, Fatma was extraordinary. By 10, she spoke 4 languages fluently: Ottoman Turkish, Arabic, Persian, and Greek. Her calligraphy was so graceful that poets said her handwriting looked like moonlight turned to ink. Palace astronomers adored her curiosity. She questioned them about celestial motion and the secrets of the stars. She devoured manuscripts on history, philosophy, and geography, hungry to understand the world beyond her walls. Chroniclers wrote of her beauty: eyes like deep wells of amber, hair like silk poured from night, but it was her mind that shone brightest. Fatma dreamed not of jewels or titles, but of knowledge. She kept journals filled with sketches of the moon's phases and architectural ideas she hoped one day to build. But brilliance offered no protection. At 14, her fate was sealed in a council meeting she would never attend. Her husband was chosen, Kara Mustafa Pasha, a hardened military commander 20 years her senior, scarred by battles against Persia. Known for his ruthless discipline, for him the marriage was a ladder to higher rank. For Fatma, it was the beginning of a nightmare that would erase the girl who loved the stars and replace her with something hollow. The preparations for that wedding would break her long before the ceremony ever arrived. 3 months before the wedding, on a cold December morning in 1622, Fatma was summoned to the innermost chamber of the harem. Her mother, Kösem, sat motionless as officials announced the match. There would be no discussion, no appeal. The date was set, March 15, 1623. That day began what they called Terbiye-i Mubarak, the sacred education. To outsiders, it sounded like etiquette training. In truth, it was psychological dismantling, systematic obedience conditioning designed to transform royal daughters into living symbols of submission. The overseer was Gulnar Hatun, a 60-year-old matron who had prepared 17 princesses before Fatma. Her face looked carved from stone. Her voice never rose above a whisper. Under her supervision, Fatma was led into the Gelin Odasu, the bride's chamber. The room was paneled in dark ebony. Thick Persian carpet swallowed sound. The windows were sealed. The only light came from oil lamps flickering against tapestries of legendary obedient wives. From dawn until noon every day, Fatma practiced the 18 postures of humility, choreographed bows and gestures, each with precise angles and meanings. The greeting bow, the serving bow, the retiring bow, the submission bow. Her neck had to tilt exactly 30 degrees. Her hands could never rise above her heart. Step by step, day after day, she repeated until her body obeyed without thought, until her spirit surrendered to reflex. Then came her voice. Her vocabulary was reduced to 43 approved words. Phrases of gratitude, apology, and humble acceptance. Yes, my lord. As you wish. Forgive my fault. Thank you for your mercy. Anything beyond that list meant punishment, forced fasting until she fainted, confinement in coffin-sized reflection cells, or public humiliation ceremonies where senior concubines hurled insults as she confessed imaginary disobedience. If you're already disturbed, brace yourself. The worst was still ahead. Twice a week came the lesson of perspective. Fatma was forced to serve her father's favorite concubines, washing them, dressing them, feeding them by hand like a servant attending queens. It was designed to annihilate what remained of her royal identity, to teach her that even women who shared her father's bed ranked above her. Witnesses wrote that Fatma often broke down, shaking uncontrollably as she clasped jewelry on women she once outranked. But nothing compared to what awaited in the underground chambers called Talim Elil, the trials of the first night. Beneath the harem, the palace maintained full-scale replicas of marital bedrooms. There, under cold supervision, Fatma was made to practice with anatomically accurate mannequins, Venetian medical models crafted for this cruel purpose. Every reaction, fear, tears, hesitation, was recorded in coded Persian logs. Any sign of resistance meant more sessions, longer hours, harsher methods. The girl who once debated scholars about astronomy was being erased, replaced by an obedient shell, a body trained to respond, a voice trained to submit, a mind trained to surrender. 1 week before the royal wedding, Fatma was moved to the Gelin Koshku, the bride's pavilion, an isolated marble structure in the palace gardens where no sound from the outside world could reach her. This was the final stage of her conditioning, the sealing of her fate. From this point onward, every breath she took, every morsel she ate, and every hour she slept was carefully controlled by the matrons of the harem. Her diet was measured to the ounce: pomegranates for fertility, honey for sweetness of temperament, almonds for endurance, goat's milk for purity, and rare spices from Yemen whose true purposes even palace physicians refused to explain. Twice each day she was bathed in water perfumed with valerian root, poppy extract, and orange blossom, a concoction created by court alchemists trained in Cordoba and Samarkand. Modern researchers believe these mixtures contained mild sedatives, narcotic oils, and compounds that dulled memory and induced a dreamlike compliance. They wanted her calm. They wanted her silent. They wanted her spirit to dissolve. The pavilion itself was beautiful and horrifying. Every wall was draped with shimmering silk tapestries illustrating the stories of ideal wives from Ottoman tradition. Women who obeyed without hesitation, who sacrificed everything for their husband's honor, who found happiness only in submission. Venetian mirrors were placed at calculated angles so that wherever Fatma looked, she saw herself, an endless reflection of the girl she no longer recognized. Centuries later, historians would identify this as a perversion of an ancient Sufi meditation called muraqaba, self-watching as a path to enlightenment. Here it was weaponized into a tool of psychological control. Fatma was forced to police even her own thoughts. Palace physicians watched her day and night. They kept secret journals describing what they called bridal tremors. Her hands shook when she tried to eat. Her breathing grew shallow and erratic. She startled violently at any sound, even the rustle of her silk robes. Today we would call this trauma and panic disorder. Back then they called it preparation. On the final evening before the ceremony, Fatma was served a special bridal tea. For centuries, no one knew what it contained. Until 2019, when researchers deciphered its recipe: concentrated poppy milk, crushed mandrake root, and an unidentified compound believed to be an early dissociative drug, the kind that severs the connection between body and mind. They didn't want her terrified. They wanted her hollow, present in flesh, absent in spirit. As the narcotic fog drifted through her veins, Fatma's final conscious thought was of the stars, the same constellations she had studied as a child, now blurred and fading from memory. The morning of March 15, 1623, dawned bright and cold over Istanbul. The city was alive with music and incense. Streets overflowed with people celebrating what they believed to be the most glorious union of the year, the marriage between the Sultan's daughter and one of the empire's greatest commanders. In the grand courtyards of Topkapi, feasts were laid upon golden platters, roasted lambs, towers of fruit and pastries soaked in honey. Janissaries performed dazzling martial demonstrations as drums thundered and the crowd cheered. But deep inside the palace, behind walls of marble and velvet, Princess Fatma sat motionless. Her pulse was weak, her skin icy despite the brazier's warmth. Palace physicians wrote that she seemed awake, yet far away, her eyes open but seeing nothing. As the festivities faded into night, the true ceremony began. She was led through the gardens by a procession of veiled women carrying candles, their flames flickering in the spring wind, and to the ancient bridal pavilion that had stood since the days of Mehmed the Conqueror. The structure was octagonal, 3 stories high, each floor representing a different phase of what palace officials called the sacred union. The first floor was for purification. For 3 hours, Fatma was bathed in steaming water, infused with Damascus rose, jasmine, sandalwood, and Somali amber. Her body was anointed with oils laced with opium and other substances meant to make her pliant and docile. The matrons called it ecstasy of surrender. Physicians described it coldly as physical relaxation preceding consummation. The second floor was for surrender. Here, attendants dressed Fatma in a bridal gown of white silk embroidered with gold thread and pearls from the Persian Gulf. The crown on her head was so heavy that it forced her chin downward, a visual symbol of obedience. But what looked like luxury was, in truth, imprisonment. Hidden inside the gown were mechanisms of restraint, internal cords that tightened across her ribs, clasps that limited her movement, jewelry that weighed her down like chains, and shoes so thick-soled she could barely walk. Her garments were a cage disguised as beauty. Meanwhile, in another chamber, her husband-to-be, Kara Mustafa Pasha, received his own instructions. Elder statesmen and former generals tutored him in methods of control. He was told how to assert dominance, how to intimidate, how to command absolute submission. He wasn't being prepared for love, but conquest. Finally came the ascent to the 3rd floor, Zifaf, the chamber of consummation. The walls glowed with tapestries of Ottoman military victories, cities burning, armies crushed, captives kneeling before their conquerors. The message was unmistakable. What happened in war would happen here. The bed, crafted from cedar and inlaid with mother-of-pearl, contained concealed ropes and pulleys. Cushions were soaked in sedative oils. The lighting was dim, the air heavy with incense designed to suppress resistance. Behind hidden screens, witnesses waited, ready to record the event in clinical detail. When the doors closed, the ritual began. What happened next was later found in encrypted Persian medical notes sealed for centuries. They described complete physical and psychological collapse. Fatma's body convulsed. Her breathing faltered. Her voice, already trained into silence, vanished completely. Kara Mustafa, trained to crush enemies on battlefields, mistook her condition for defiance. He used the techniques he had been taught: intimidation, assertion, forced submission, not realizing that there was nothing left to break. Fatma was no longer there. Her mind had fled, deep into a dissociative void, a last act of self-preservation. What the physicians documented as consummation came only after hours of failed attempts. Their notes, written in detached medical language, mention internal injuries, repeated fainting, and what they called ruhun çıkması, the departure of the soul. When dawn rose over Istanbul, the empire celebrated the success of a royal wedding. But inside that pavilion, a girl had died. Not her body, which would live for 29 more years, but her spirit, her voice, her mind. That morning, the empire gained an alliance, but it lost one of its brightest lights. In the days that followed the wedding night, even the most hardened matrons of the harem grew uneasy. Something inside Princess Fatma had shattered beyond repair. She no longer spoke in full sentences, only in faint, broken whispers, and only when directly commanded. Her appetite vanished completely. Palace physicians noted that she had to be fed by hand like an infant. Several times each day, her body would convulse with silent sobs, tears streaming but no sound escaping. It was as if her voice had been buried alongside her will. The guards soon noticed a disturbing pattern. The mere sight of a man, even trusted eunuchs who had served her since childhood, would trigger a violent panic. She would hyperventilate, tremble uncontrollably, and collapse into unconsciousness. The palace staff began calling it fear sickness. She couldn't even remain in the same room as her father, the Sultan. The guards had to be rotated so that no male presence entered her chambers. Physicians were both baffled and frightened. They called her condition melancholia ibakira, virginal melancholy, a term used to describe the inexplicable despair that followed royal marriages. But Fatma's illness was not melancholy. It was trauma, though no one in the 17th century had words for it. They tried everything: herbal remedies steeped in saffron and rose water, music therapy, Sufi chants, even strange experiments involving magnets and exotic diets. Nothing helped. The brilliant child who had once filled notebooks with sketches of stars and questions about the universe was gone. Her journals gathered dust. Her ink dried up. The gardens she had once explored with such wonder became forbidden territory, reminders of a freedom she no longer felt. Her marriage to Kara Mustafa Pasha continued in name only. There were children, 4 in total, conceived during encounters Fatma endured in the same detached state that had claimed her on that first night. To the outside world she appeared serene and obedient, a model of royal virtue. In truth, she was a living ghost. At public ceremonies, she stood beside her husband like a porcelain statue, motionless, expressionless, flawless. The illusion of normalcy was vital to the empire. It proved that royal bloodlines remained strong, alliances unbroken. But the private diaries of palace attendants tell a darker truth. Kara Mustafa, once proud and ruthless, began spending more and more time away, first on military campaigns, then in solitude, and eventually in opium dens. Some claimed he volunteered for the most dangerous frontiers of the empire. Desperate for death, or at least distraction, he had been celebrated as a conqueror. Yet in private, he was haunted by the conquest he could never justify. Fatma lived on like this for 29 years, half alive, half remembered. She became a ceremonial ornament of the court, a vessel for alliances, a symbol of obedience. Her mother, Sultan, ruled the empire from behind veiled screens, while her daughter remained trapped within them. On March 15, 1652, exactly 29 years to the day of her wedding, Fatma's body finally gave out. The official record lists the cause as brain fever, but everyone in the palace whispered otherwise. They said she simply chose to stop, that on the anniversary of the night that killed her spirit, she let her heart follow. The court mourned her briefly. There were ceremonies, prayers, and carefully worded inscriptions praising her piety and obedience. The official chronicles recorded her as the dutiful wife of Kara Mustafa Pasha, mother of 4 imperial children, remembered for her grace and virtue, but the truth of who she had been, the gifted astronomer, the curious philosopher, The girl who dreamed of designing palaces vanished from history. The empire didn't just silence her voice, it erased her entirely. And yet Fatma's tragedy was not isolated. It was systemic. For centuries, the Ottoman princess's wedding rituals remained cloaked in secrecy. Chroniclers described processions and celebrations, but never what happened in the sealed chambers of the palace. The pain was hidden beneath poetry, the screams beneath music. That silence lasted for 600 years. Then, in 2019, a team of researchers from Boğaziçi University's Ottoman Studies Department, led by Dr. Elif Korkmaz, gained access to restricted archives inside Istanbul's Topkapi Palace Museum. What they found was astonishing and horrifying. There were coded Persian medical journals, encrypted correspondence between harem officials, architectural blueprints of bridal pavilions with detailed notes about observation chambers and restraint systems, and recipes for the sedative compounds administered. To princesses before their wedding nights, the documents had been scattered intentionally across different collections to avoid detection, hidden in plain sight for centuries. Dr. Korkmaz's team spent 3 years translating and cross-referencing the material. Their findings revealed that at least 37 Ottoman princesses between 1530 and 1826 underwent the same ritual Fatma had endured, known officially as Terbiye-i Mubarak, the sacred education. Of those, 12 developed what modern psychiatry now recognizes as severe post-traumatic stress disorder. 5 attempted or completed suicide. 8 disappeared from palace records. Entirely, chemical analysis of the preserved sedative mixtures revealed active compounds identical to modern-day dissociatives and anxiolytics, drugs designed to erase fear and suppress memory. The psychological methods described matched the same coercive conditioning, patterns documented in 20th century studies of control and indoctrination. When the report was published, the reaction was explosive. Some nationalist historians called it blasphemy, an attack on Ottoman honor. Others dismissed it as misinterpretation or Western exaggeration. But trauma psychologists who reviewed the evidence agreed almost unanimously. The rituals described constituted deliberate psychological torture, designed to annihilate individual will and create perfect obedience. The revelation changed how historians viewed the Ottoman court. It forced the world to confront a chilling truth, that beneath the grandeur of empire lay centuries of institutionalized cruelty, disguised as tradition. The revelations uncovered by Dr. Elif Korkmaz's team sent shockwaves through the world of academia. Their research reignited interest in the secret lives of royal women across other empires and dynasties. Soon, similar patterns began to surface, from the silk-draped chambers of China's Forbidden City to the gilded halls of Renaissance Europe, to the palaces of Mughal India. Each culture, in its own way, had crafted rituals of obedience, turning royal daughters into silent instruments of political control. The difference was that the Ottomans had perfected it. Fatma's tragedy, and the tragedies of dozens like her, revealed an uncomfortable truth that echoed across centuries. Absolute power protects no one, not even its own children. The outside world imagined Ottoman princesses as symbols of beauty and luxury, pampered women surrounded by jewels, perfumed gardens, and endless privilege. But the reality was a gilded prison. Their every movement was monitored, their marriages arranged like military strategies. Their bodies became treaties, their silence became policy. This was not cruelty by accident. It was cruelty by design. What Dr. Korkmaz's research revealed was more than a hidden history. It exposed a system that weaponized trauma. The Ottoman court understood, long before modern psychology gave it a name, that the most effective form of control isn't physical restraint, it's psychological surrender. If you can make someone believe that obedience is safety and resistance is death, you never need chains. Their mind becomes the cage. Fatma's story is a haunting example of this truth. She wasn't merely a victim of circumstance, she was proof of how far power will go to preserve itself. And what haunts us most today isn't just what happened, it's how completely it was hidden. For 600 years, these rituals were erased from history. The same empire that destroyed these women also deleted their suffering. Official records replaced their pain with poetry, their trauma with triumph, their names with silence, until the archives finally spoke. Forensic historians and trauma experts working alongside, Korkmaz's team reconstructed the forgotten architecture of the palace's hidden chambers. The blueprints of the bridal pavilions showed soundproofed walls, concealed observation alcoves, and hydraulic systems used to secure beds and doors. Every detail was designed for surveillance and submission. The medical records described dissociative symptoms, panic episodes, and what they called ruhun çıkması, the departure of the soul. Modern experts now recognize this as a vivid description of clinical dissociation, the mind's last defense against unbearable trauma. For 6 centuries, those words remained locked behind scripts few could read. When the documents were finally translated, they exposed not just the suffering of individuals, but the architecture of an empire's moral decay. And that raises a terrifying question. How many other truths like this still lie buried in the archives of power around the world? The Ottoman story is only one thread in a global pattern, where political necessity disguises itself as ritual, and cruelty hides behind ceremony. It forces us to confront something deeply unsettling. The past we celebrate is often built on the silence of those who suffered for it. Fatma's story reminds us that history is not only written by the victors, it's written by those powerful enough to erase the victims. Her pain, like that of so many others, was turned into myth. The empires called it duty. The chroniclers called it devotion. But what it really was domination. The research findings led to fierce public debate. Some tried to dismiss the revelations, arguing that judging ancient traditions through a modern lens was unfair. But others, especially survivors of modern coercive systems, saw something disturbingly familiar. The same patterns of control, submission, and silence still existed, just under new names. Fatma's voice had been stolen, but her story now speaks for countless others. Her journals never survived. Her words were never recorded. But through the fragments of history, through coded documents, medical notes, and architectural evidence, her truth emerged, piece by piece. The story forces us to ask difficult questions. How many voices have been silenced by culture, power, or tradition? How many women have been rewritten to fit narratives that made their suffering acceptable? And how many truths are still buried beneath the golden myths of empires? The official story of Ottoman glory celebrated conquest, architecture, art, and order. But beneath that magnificence was a hidden machinery of control, one that broke minds as effectively as it built monuments. The story of Fatma is not just Ottoman history. It is human history, the recurring pattern of how power consumes innocence and disguises violence as virtue. Her story teaches us that cruelty doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers through rituals. Sometimes it hides behind silk curtains and sacred words. And the most dangerous thing about history isn't what we don't know. It's what we were never meant to know. When we uncover stories like Fatma's, we do more than learn. We restore. We give back the humanity that centuries of silence tried to erase. So if this story has shaken you, if it's made you question the comfort of official history, then remember this. The truth isn't always buried under lies. Sometimes it's buried under ceremony. And every time one of those truths is brought to light, another voice once silenced finally speaks again. Until next time, keep questioning what you've been told. Because the truth is always darker, stranger, and more human than the version written by power.